When you look down at your plate, what do you really see? Because it's more than just a meal, right? There's a whole story behind how it was grown, a story that's being shaped by two huge competing ideas about the future of our farms.
And it all comes down to this one massive question. Seriously, this is one of the fundamental challenges of our time. We've got a global population rocketing towards 10 billion people. The pressure on our food resources is just immense. How we decide to answer this is going to define everything: our health, our environment, and our future. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at the sheer scale of this challenge. Then we'll dive into the two big competing solutions, what I'm calling the scientific playbook and the organic alternative. We'll actually put them head to head, see how they work in the real world, check out how all this applies to raising animals, and then finally, try and figure out what the future on our plate might actually look like. So at the heart of this whole food puzzle are two really different ways of thinking. The first one is all about intervention and optimization. It asks, how can we use science to engineer the absolute maximum output from every single square inch of land? But the second philosophy is all about integration and harmony. It asks, how can we work with nature's systems to create food that's abundant, sure, but also resilient and sustainable for the long haul? All right, first up, the scientific playbook. You should think of this as a super methodical problem-solving approach. The goal is crystal clear: get the most food possible out of every single crop. It's a strategy that's really built on precision, control, and enhancement. And this entire playbook really rests on three powerful pillars. First, you start by engineering a better plant from the get-go. Second, you manage its diet with perfectly optimized nutrients. And third, you run a really tight defense, protecting that plant from all the pests, weeds, and diseases trying to get at it. So let's break each of those down. A huge piece of improving crops is hybridization. And honestly, you can think of it like strategic matchmaking for plants. Scientists will cross different varieties, sometimes even different species, to create an offspring that gets the best traits from both parents. Like the really high yield from one plant and the awesome disease resistance from another. And if you take that idea a step further, you get to genetically modified crops, or GMOs. Now, instead of just crossing two plants and kind of hoping for the best mix of traits, genetic modification lets scientists be incredibly precise. They can insert a single specific gene to give a plant a desired characteristic. Things like making corn that produces its own insecticide, or soybeans that are resistant to weed killer. Okay, now let's talk about feeding the plants. Nutrient management. Manures are the traditional route, right? It's decomposed organic stuff that slowly makes the soil richer. Fertilizers, on the other hand, are the high-tech option. These are commercially produced compounds designed to deliver a really precise, concentrated dose of specific nutrients, like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK, straight to the plant. And finally, crop protection. You gotta protect your investment. The scientific playbook has a deep toolkit for this. The frontline defense is often pesticides, chemicals that target insects, weeds, and fungi. But the playbook is also about playing smart defense. It's about using those genetically resistant varieties we talked about, rotating crops to break pest cycles, and even doing things like summer plowing to expose pest hiding in the soil. Okay, let's switch gears completely and look at the organic alternative. Now, this is way less a set of techniques and much more a whole philosophy. It's about seeing the farm not as a food factory, but as a complex ecosystem that has to be managed for long-term health. It relies on practices like composting and cover crops to build a resilient system right from the ground up. And this quote right here, it just gets to the absolute core of the idea. The term organic farming was actually coined by this guy, Lord Northbourne, who saw the farm not as a bunch of inputs and outputs, but as a single living organism. In his view, every single part, the soil, the plants, the animals, the farmer, they're all connected and have to work in harmony. So this whole philosophy is guided by four main principles. First is health for the entire system, from the tiniest microbe in the soil all the way to the person eating the food. Then there's ecology, which is all about working with natural cycles, not against them. Then you have fairness in all relationships with people and the environment. And finally, care, which is a deep commitment to protecting the planet for future generations. So we have these two really different visions for how to grow our food. One is all about maximizing output. The other is focused on holistic health. But how do they actually perform when you put them side by side in the real world? Let's put them to the test.
Now, this is fascinating because it reveals something that you only see over the long term. This graph shows a 21-year study comparing two fields. So look at plot B first. That one used chemical fertilizers. See that huge immediate spike in yield? But then, notice the gradual decline over time as the soil health degrades. Now look at plot A, the one treated with organic manure. The initial boost is smaller, for sure, but over 2 decades it builds a healthier, more fertile soil, and that leads to a higher, more sustainable yield in the long run. And the broader data tells a very similar story of trade-offs. On average, studies show that organic yields are about 80% of conventional ones. But, and this is a big but, organic systems use way less energy and support a lot more biodiversity. Conventional farming, though, is more land efficient. It simply produces more food per acre, and that's a really critical factor on an increasingly crowded planet. But here's a number that might actually surprise you. Despite those slightly lower yields, a huge global analysis found that organic farming is actually 22 to 35% more profitable for farmers. How? Well, it's largely because they don't have to buy super expensive synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and their crops often sell for a premium. Of course, farming isn't just about plants. These competing philosophies also have a huge impact on how we raise animals for meat, milk, and eggs. So how does this whole scientific versus organic debate play out in the barn and the pasture?
Well, a key piece of the puzzle is diet. Animal feed is generally broken down into two types. You've got roughage, which is the bulky, fibrous stuff like hay and green fodder. Think of it as the salad. Then you have concentrates, which are low in fiber but packed with nutrients, like proteins, things like oil seeds and grains. That's kind of like the protein shake. A balanced diet with both is absolutely critical.
And improving livestock production follows a pretty clear blueprint, one that can actually be applied in both conventional and organic systems. It always starts with good nutrition. That's followed by proactive healthcare like vaccinations. And just like with crops, using high-yielding breeds through selective breeding plays a huge role. It all falls under the umbrella of just good animal husbandry. So where does that leave us? We've got the high-yield scientific approach and the sustainable organic philosophy. Does it really have to be a choice? Must we pick one over the other? Or is there a way to maybe combine the best of both worlds? Well, the exciting thing is, a lot of farmers are already finding this middle ground. A perfect example is a strategy called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. The philosophy is really just common sense. You start with organic methods. You use beneficial insects, you rotate your crops, you plant resistant varieties. Synthetic pesticides aren't forbidden, but they become a tool of absolute last resort, used only when it's totally necessary. And that right there, that might just be the key takeaway from all of this. The future of our food doesn't have to be this epic battle between two extremes. It could be, and probably should be, a smarter, integrated system that borrows the ecological wisdom of organic farming while also leveraging the incredible precision and innovation of science. Ultimately, the choices that we all make as consumers, as citizens, as innovators, are going to shape the fields of tomorrow. It's a really complex system. There are no easy answers, only important trade-offs. So I'll leave you with this to think about. What does the future of food look like to you?